The last concept and idea we're going to look at here are 3 note per string scale fingerings. Now, truth be told, I actually learned this from Paul Gilbert's first, instructional video. I was a kid. I was like 15 or whatever, when I acquired a copy of that. I think I traded a book to a friend of mine, James Ashworth. I think I traded a book. I can't remember now, James. I think it was the Troy Stetna, the the Speed Mechanics or whatever, the Troy Stetna book. I think I traded the book for the Paul Gilbert video because James had already kind of worked through it. And I remember I got a hold of that and I wore that tape out. I mean, I learned every single bit I could from that Gilbert video. And that was kind of my introduction to these 3 note per string scales. And then, it kind of gave me a head start because, a few years later, I attended AIM, in Atlanta, and they talked about this. And I remember when they gave it to us, I was like, well, hey, I already know this because thanks, Paul Gilbert. He kind of clued me into this world. But if you don't know this, this is really, really important. And I'm talking about Gilbert's video, but I'm not gonna really, recreate what Gilbert was showing. We're gonna do something different with that information. But learning 3 note per string, major and minor scales is very important. It's a great technique boost for one thing. It gets you away from pentatonic boxes and 2 note per string, ideas. But if you haven't really done this before, it's going to be huge and kind of eye-opening. So in, guitar music, even though it's always best to think of the actual note you're playing, some people, because they're so wired with tablature, they think of numbers, 5, 8, 5, 7, 5, 7, and it's like, no, you should be thinking of A, C, D, E, G, or whatever, instead of just the fret numbers, because really, the fret numbers is just going to help, any fretted musician, a guitarist, a bassist, ukulele or something, banjo or whatever. So you could look at a bass player and say, well, play the 5th fret, and they'd know what you're saying. But let's say you're playing with someone, that plays piano, where there's a horn section, or, another instrument that isn't a fretted, stringed instrument. Even like a violinist, those are fretless or whatever, a cello or whatever. If you said the 5th fret, a violinist would look at you and say, well, what does that mean? What note is that? And if you don't know, then that's kind of sad. That's almost like saying, well, I'm a writer, but I'm illiterate. Well, it's like, well, then you're not a writer. It's, how could you write a book if you were illiterate? Well, I kind of feel that way about music. You're not really a musician until you understand music, and you use, note names instead of fret names, or you mention the name of the scale instead of just saying, well, it's this shape, because shapes really aren't scales. I mean, you might be playing a scale, but, you really won't know the scale until you actually know, the notes, how it's constructed, what chords it's used with, and like the actual application of it. And that scares people. It scared me. That's the reason I'm talking about it, because these are, areas that are kind of sensitive. People don't really want to admit when they don't really know something. They're like, oh yeah, I know that. And, they completely don't really know it, or they think that they know it. Okay, so with this, I'm going to share 3 of the most common, 3 note per string scale fingerings. And this is going to help you with major scales and minor scales as far as, the modes that come from the major scale, because they're all related. Because technically the major scale is the parent scale for those modes that come from the major scale. All right, so the first shape involves a whole step and a half step. So it's going to be E, F sharp, and G here on the D string. So I'm going to keep things in the key of E minor. That's shape 1. And then I want you to move up to the next shape, which is going to be the 4th fret, 5th fret, and 7th fret, or F sharp, G, and A on the D string. And that's, a half step and a whole step together. And then the final shape is, 2 whole steps, where we've got G, A, and B right there on the 5th, 7th, and 9th frets. So those are the 3 most popular or common 3 note per string shapes, especially, related to the major scale or the minor scale modes. So So keep in mind, harmonic minor and melodic minor are going to have different fingerings. They don't really apply to this necessarily. But what we can do is we can learn those 3 fingerings, and I'm going to expand that to 2 strings now. And right there, I'm just locking in to 2, 4, 5, 2, 4, 5, or E, F sharp, G, A, B, C on the D and the G string. Now go to the next position and do the same thing. There's F sharp, G, A, B, C, and D. And then go to that next shape, and you'll see there's G, A, B, C, D, E. So we're basically just climbing up, E natural minor on 2 strings like that. It's kind of similar to what we did with the minor pentatonic scale, a few episodes ago. But now we're building this 3 note per string technique, right? And you can descend, and you can kind of play around with those shapes. But basically, what happens after we've hit this, 5, 7, and 9 fingering, that double, whole step shape? As we continue up the scale, you'll begin to notice we're going to start mixing and matching those 3 shapes. It's not going to stay uniformed like that as we continue up, and you'll see what I mean as soon as we get past this. So it starts there, continues here, continues here, and then the next shape you'll see on the fretboard, you're going to have the whole step and half step that we started with, and then you're going to have that 2 whole step shape right there on the G, and that's just continuing E natural minor right here. There's A, B, C, D, E, F sharp right there. The next shape, it's going to have the half step and whole step on the D string, and then the whole step and half step on the G. So there's your B, C, D, E, F sharp, and G right there. But notice how we're combining 2 of those shapes that we kind of started with in the original, trio of shapes that we uncovered. So there we have this. Now this modified shape here, that modified shape here. If you continue to the next shape, now you can see we've got 2 whole steps, in that position, and then a half step and a whole step on the G string. And we continue up to the next position, and now we're back to having 2 whole steps again. And there's your D, E, F sharp, G, A, B. Now if you go up to the 14th fret, we're basically an octave higher than when we started. So there's the finish line. I mean, you can continue to go up as high as you want, depending on how many frets you have. But we're going to stop right there, basically. So right there, we just mapped out E natural minor on 2 strings in the middle, the middle of the fretboard on the D and the G. And you can run that with legato. But the important thing there is you're learning how to kind of mix and match those 3 different fingerings. The whole step, half step, the half step, whole step, and then the dual whole step, or double whole step, however you want to see it. All right, that's going to wrap this episode of Scales and Tales, and I'll be back with some more, episodes in this series, and also the chord play and 3-for-all. So leave some feedback and some comments, and please subscribe to Late Night Lessons, and I'll be back before you know it. Thank you.